Why all millionaires follow 20% rule. Pareto's principle, also known as the 80-20 rule, is a concept that states that, in many areas in life, 80% of the effects come from 20% of the causes, or that 80% of the results can be achieved with 20% of the effort. When it comes to investing, many people may indeed realize that 80% of their investment returns come from only 20% of their asset allocations. But, since we can't predict the future, building a diversified portfolio with multiple asset classes is still the safest way to go. In this article, I don't want to try to predict which assets will give you most of your returns, no one can do that. Instead, here I want to discuss a much more predictable way in which the 80-20 rule affects your long-term investments. More specifically, I will point out how Pareto's principle can be perceived in the effect of compounding interest over the years. A typical example: investing for 40 years. Suppose that, starting today, you decide to invest $5,000 every year, aiming to have a comfortable retirement fund 40 years from now. Let's also assume that you get an annual return rate of 7% from those investments, slightly below the S&P 500's average over the last 100 years, adjusted for inflation. If you follow that plan for the next 40 years, you'll end up with $1,068,047.85 after having invested only $200,000. Check this article if you want to learn how to make those calculations. Not bad, right? And remember, we have already adjusted for inflation in those calculations. But where does all that money come from? Basically, your final amount will be the sum of those $5,000 yearly contributions, each compounding at 7% annually starting from the date it gets allocated. But here's a catch: while your first $5,000 contribution will compound for 40 years and in the end will have become $74,872.29, your last contribution will only compound for 1 year and become $5,350. You can check in the chart below what will be the final value of each of those 40 individual contributions you'll make. The chart is very clear: the contributions you make in the early years are much more important than the ones you make in the late years. And this is where we can think of checking if Pareto's principle applies. Would it be possible to invest only 20% of those total $200,000 and still get 80% of the final $1,068,047? The answer, unfortunately, is no. At least, not with the numbers used in the example above. But the conclusions are far from being disappointing. If you only make the $5,000 contributions in the first 8 years, 20%, you'll end up with $478,380.72, 44.7%, after 40 years. Alternatively, if you decide to contribute for 20 years, 50%, you'll end up with $848,721.97, 79.5%, after 40 years, having invested. In other words, instead of investing $5,000 every year for 40 years, you can do it for the next 20 years and then just let those investments compound for another 20 years, without ever investing a single dollar again. By doing that, you'll still end up with roughly 80% of what you'll accumulate if you never stop contributing. So, instead of Pareto's usual 80-20 distribution, we could say that in this example we have an 80-50 distribution, which still sounds pretty good to me. Or, depending on how many annual contribution. 5 years, 12.5%, $328,480.55, 30.8%. 10 years, 25%, $562,682.64, 52.7%. 15 years, 37.5%, $729,665.50, 68.3%. 20 years, 50%, $848,721.97, 79.5%. 25 years, 62.5%, $933,607.58, 87.4%. 30 years, 75%, $994,129.85, 93.1%. 35 years, 87.5%, $1,037,281.40, 97.1%. 40 years, 100%, $1,068,047.85, 100%.